Please take your seats. This session is on agriculture. Well, the paper work which is being supported by the IGC, promoting balanced use of chemical fertilizers by Avinash Kishore. And the chair of the session is Mr. A.K. Chauhan, who is the State Election Commissioner of Bihar. We are very fortunate that he has given us some time. I'll leave. And of course, the discussant is Sisir Debnath. Mr. Chauhan.
Good morning, everybody. Today's session is on a very important aspect of food production. So before starting the actual lecture, I would draw your kind attention towards three facets of latest food scenario. India's population is increasing day by day. As far as my information goes, it's about CAGR, that was compounded annual growth of rate is about 1.97%. That means about 20 million of people are being added each year. A rough calculation shows that this means that we would be needing a food grain production of about 300 million tons per annum to sustain this growing population and the existing population. Considering that no further land is coming under cultivation or crop culture, the only way open to us is increasing the productivity of the food crops or introducing new food crops. Introducing new food crops is difficult in the existing agroclimatic conditions. So increasing the productivity is the main way to increase the food production. Coming to productivity, immediately comes to our mind is the fertilization of the land. That is the use of fertilizers. As far as chemical fertilizers and inorganic fertilizer goes, the fertilizer subsidy regime is already existing, and I have some figures. The Government of India is spending more than 72,000 crores as on today per annum on fertilizer subsidy. In fact, it has reduced compared to 2008 and 2009, where fertilizer subsidy was about 1,20,000 crore rupees. So with this huge subsidy burden, we have to increase the food grain production. Now, coming to the topic as such, everybody knows that overuse or irrational use of fertilizer is harmful. Now, with two aspects, one is increasing the food grain production, increasing the productivity, restricting the use of harmful use of chemical fertilizers. Herein lies the importance of this topic, which is Mr. Avinash Kishore will deliver a lecture on this. Now, with this background in mind, I would introduce today's lead speaker, Mr. Avinash Kishore. His topic is promoting balanced use of chemical fertilizers. Dr. Avinash Kishore is a postdoctoral fellow in International Food Policy Research Institute. He has done his PhD in public policy from Harvard University and Masters in Public Affairs from Princeton University. Avinash has also studied at IRMA, Anand, and worked for 4 years with International Water Management Institute before going to the USA for higher studies. Dr. Kishore is interested in agriculture, environment, and development economics. At IFPRI, his works aimed towards bridging the gap between the laboratories and farms in Indian agriculture using action research in collaboration with agriculture universities, agribusiness firms, and farmers. And today's discussant is Mr. Sisir Debnath. He is an assistant professor of economics and public policy at the ISB Hyderabad. He received his PhD from the University of Virginia in USA. His primary research research interests are in the areas of development economics and empirical microeconomics. So with this brief introduction, I request Mr. Avinash to start the proceedings. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So, thanks, sir, for a kind introduction. I'm Avinash Kishore from IFPRI. This year, I don't know if you know, this is the International Year of Soil, and the slogan is Healthy Soils for a Healthy Life. We're almost in the 7th month. So, I mean, we have been working on soil and soil health issues even before this was announced. And one of the things that Honorable Chair just mentioned, that imbalanced use of fertilizers, too much use of some of the macronutrients like urea and too little use of some of the secondary and micronutrients is a very common, it's a widespread problem in all of India, not just Bihar. So we were wondering if one of the issues that is always in mind is that maybe it's the perverse incentives. There is a very high subsidy on urea. That could be one of the reasons why we see what we see. And the other is that maybe our farmers are not so aware of the chemical properties of the soil that they're tilling and exactly what is needed. That could be the other reason that we see what we see. So that's why we thought that we would just do a small experiment on whether providing farmers information could help correct some of this imbalance. And this study was supported by IGC and also IFPRI itself and the IGC project by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So as I just said, fertilizer use is highly imbalanced. There's too much use of urea almost all across India. Government of India as of now spends about 1% of GDP on just subsidy of urea or nitrogenous fertilizers. That's one problem. A second problem, like in our eating habits for like us human beings, our farmers apply very little of secondary and micronutrients, which are also important in itself, in themselves and of themselves, but also for the urea and other fertilizers to work effectively. There's a government program that I'll talk a little more about to give the usual recommendations that the farmers get is a very coarse one, 3:2:1 or 4:2:1 ratio of NPK, and it's not customized to individual farmers or individual crops. So the hypothesis that we had is would farmers be more responsive? Would they change their behavior if we gave them plot-specific, crop-specific recommendations on what is the right use of fertilizers? And part of the reason for doing this exercise, launching this experiment, is that Government of India has recently, there has been a soil health testing program going on for a while, but it's recently launched a massive scheme, a very ambitious scheme, wherein the goal is that all about 150 million land holdings in India, soil tests would be done, and crop-specific recommendations will be given to farmers. And in the program, as it is envisaged and is also going on, farmer receives a soil health card, which tells him what his soil is like on different parameters, and then gives crop-specific, but also yield-specific. So it's not just an agronomic recommendation, it's almost an economic response. It tells you if your targeted yield is 3 tons, you should apply this amount. If your targeted yield is 4 tons, you should apply this amount. So crop-specific, plot-specific, yield-specific recommendations to farmers. That's the design. And a farmer has to pay a very small amount. It varies from state to state. In some states, a farmer can get it even for free. So the field experiment basically wanted to test, there's this huge program for the next 3 years, like do soil health cards influence farmer choices? And if our prior was they do not, because we have talked to farmers and talked in the states where the program is more advanced, and the sense one got is that it doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. You can even see it in the secondary data. We have issued a lot of soil health cards, but you don't see any big changes in the pattern of fertilizers after you control for prices.
And the third question that one was interested in, like for the farmers who do follow the recommendations, does it increase their yields? Does it increase their net incomes? And to do this, we did sort of a randomized control trial. We picked 3 districts from Bihar, 2 in South Bihar, which are high productivity and also high fertilizer use intensity, and 1 from North Bihar, which is relatively more underdeveloped, agriculture is more underdeveloped, in Madhubani. And altogether, we had 32 villages in our treatment group, 18 farmers per village. This was the selection of villages and farmers was random. And then we had 16 villages in control groups. So we trained 7, 8 boys from Bihar. They went, they collected soil samples. The soil sample was tested, all the soil samples were tested in the Rajendra Agriculture University lab, which is perhaps the best working soil testing lab in Bihar. And then the experts there developed recommendations according to their scientific knowledge. And then we delivered these soil health cards to farmer at their doorstep. And also the soil test results and recommendations, we tried to explain it to the farmers. What does it mean? What does it say? So that was the intervention here. Just a quick run through our randomization work. If you look at it, the treatment group and control group are very similar on most counts. One that I have highlighted here is that thus far the soil testing program is at a very infant stage in Bihar. Very, very few farmers have had self-reported that their soil was tested. So it's at a very early stage. And on all other parameters, or even on that parameter, the 2 groups are look very similar to each other. So just to give you a picture of what the soil health card looks like. So the first page is like 2-sided. The first page tells you different properties of your soil. What is the content of soil for like organic carbon, which gives you an indication of how much urea you should be applying, phosphorus, potash, sulfur, zinc. And it also, apart from the quantity, it also told farmers, if you look towards the right, that whether it was low, medium, or high in the content. And then the second page gave crop-specific recommendations to farmers. In our case, we gave farmers recommendation only for wheat. All these 3 districts are predominantly wheat-growing areas. So the recommendation tells you how much of each of these fertilizers you should be applying. So the soil analysis results that were done, the soil testing results showed that the red line shows the threshold value for being medium or high urea. So urea, almost half in all 3 districts, half of the farmers reported very little organic carbon, low organic carbon content in the soil. That is a result of less application of organic matter to the soil and over years intense use of urea, probably that too. Phosphate deficiency is more serious. Almost all plots, I think all plots, barring one, had very low phosphate content compared to what is considered at least average or above average. The potash, normally not only in Bihar but generally in India, potash deficiency is less serious and less prevalent a problem. A lot of farmers had sufficient potash in their soil and would not be required to add too much of it. When we also collected a baseline data of what farmers normally do even before we did our interventions. So farmers' practices were not quite, it could be possible that farmers already knew broadly. They didn't know the exact numbers, but they probably had a good sense of what is there in their soil and what is not there. But when we compared the results, the recommendations from our baseline, that doesn't seem to be the case. For example, the scientific recommendation would suggest that all farmers in these 3 districts who are growing wheat should be applying small doses of potash to their land. But only 170 of our 500 odd farmers were applying potash for wheat. Urea and DAP, everyone applies. Everyone in Bihar who grows wheat applies urea and DAP. The quantity may vary. On micronutrients, I'm giving you just one example, zinc. Very few farmers, a lot of farmers, like 1/3 of our farmers in our sample should be applying zinc to at least their paddy or wheat crop, but barely anyone does. So less application of micronutrients is not just a problem in Bihar, it's a nationwide problem. We see it here too. Then we match the recommendations with actual application of each of these fertilizers. So what the 45-degree line shows that if the dots are on 45-degree line, meaning the farmer is applying exactly as what is recommended, you'll see that most of the dots are above the 45-degree line. meaning almost all farmers in our sample, including in Madhubani, which is a very low yield kind of area, even there, and a very poor district if you go there. Even there, most of the farmers are applying more urea than they should be. And in urea's case, maybe it is because there's high levels of subsidy on urea, and that just But what is interesting is the DAP, which is a very, very expensive nutrient and is not that subsidized. Actually, it's an open market for DAP. Government doesn't control its price. Even DAP, most farmers, more than half of farmers are over applying DAP. And DAP is not only expensive, it's not subsidized, it is expensive. And scientists will tell you that if you over apply DAP, it does nothing. All the excess application goes and gets fixed in the soil. And from there, it's only very slowly released, and farmers do not get benefit of it. Okay. Still, farmers tend to do that. And I saw that problem even in Bangladesh. I was doing fieldwork in Bangladesh, and I asked farmers about phosphate. I asked them because Bangladesh has a lot of water bodies, and even in rural areas, almost all of them had algal bloom. Algal bloom is mainly because phosphate contamination is a big reason for algal bloom in water bodies. So I asked farmers, have you had your soil tested? They said yes. And do you apply phosphate? Yes. How does your application compare to what they recommend? And they said to me in Bangla, which I will translate to you, is like, the scientists recommend us to apply it by tablespoons, we apply it by shovels. And they laughed. So even in poor countries like Bangladesh and Bihar, all of Eastern India, this is a serious problem. Potash, as I said, only 1/3 of the farmers apply, though everyone is recommended to apply it. But those who apply more than what the scientists would recommend. So potash is more interesting. So generally, farmers' application is not in sync with what scientific tests would suggest. So after that, we looked at, we gave the soil health cards, and we were interested to see if soil health cards influence choices. So, well, the early results that we have is that it doesn't. Because as you will see here, most of the farmers, the soil health cards that we had given them, they had kept it. They have kept, when we asked, do you have your soil health card, when we went after the season, can you show it to us? So most of them could show it to us. But when we asked, like, did you consult it when you were applying, or did you take it in, keep it in mind, the recommendations when you were applying it? Only 21% claimed that they even factored it in their decision making on what to apply, how much to apply. Others outrightly rejected it, or it just skipped their mind. So the next step that we wanted to do, like whether giving soil health card would have any impact on net returns on our yields, almost became moot. Like, you didn't even need to do it. If they didn't consider it, you cannot expect any impact on yields or returns. So then we were in a fix, like, that's not interesting enough to just tell that, oh, no one didn't pay attention to. So we wanted to understand that why did farmers, we tried to do everything as it should have been done, then why do farmers ignore soil health cards? So we had not proposed, it was not in our original proposal or experiment design, but we decided to add one module to our ongoing experiment. About 180 farmers, 120 in Madhubani and 60 in South Bihar. As I said, there was a report, the recommendation was that they should be applying zinc to their paddy or wheat crop. So what we did is, and this 180 is not a random subsample of the 500, so it's not experimental, this part, but we just still, I think it would still help, so we did it. So we did something called BDM auction, where we've offered farmers this fertilizer. The BDM auctions are a way to figure out farmers' willingness to pay, or someone's willingness to pay for whatever good or service you're offering. So we decided to carry out these BDM auctions pretty late in our experiment. And we decided to offer the zinc packets. We offered 1 to 4 kgs of zinc to farmers. We took zinc at their doorstep, and we decided to offer it to farmers, both groups, farmers who were zinc deficient and farmers whose soil was not zinc deficient. And we, before the auction process, we told them clearly, we gave a second copy of the recommendation, and we told them clearly, made it very clear in Hindi, for those whose soil had deficiency, that your soil has deficiency, application would have these benefits according to experts, would you like to buy it? And these are the prices, and we played the auction game. For those it was not deficient, we did the same, but we made it very clear to them that, look, your soil does not have zinc deficiency, and you do not need it. But if you want to buy it, you have the option to play the game, to take part in the auction and get it. So, and there are 2 or 3 hypotheses about why certain recommendation would not be followed. There could be others too, but the main that we are playing with is that maybe these recommendations have cash costs, farmers are cash constrained or credit constrained, and that's why they are not doing it. The second is that the recommendation that we gave, even though we tried to explain, they didn't understand what is being said, what is being written, what is being explained. The third is that they do not believe the recommendations. So we played this auction game mainly to understand which one of these is going on. So the credit constraint didn't turn out to be a problem. If you look at it in both, I've divided the sample between North and South Bihar because the two are different. South, the farmers are relatively well off, North, they're poorer. You'll see that the willingness to pay is almost exactly the same. There's no significant difference between the group who was clearly told you don't need to apply it, but if you want, you can get it, and those who were told that you need to apply it and it would have benefits. Both groups were equally interested in buying, and their willingness to pay are very close to each other. So it doesn't seem to be that they didn't have money and that's why they don't do it, at least for zinc. I'm not sure if we can. The second is, do they understand soil health cards? So we had some farmer quizzes on telephone and then in person too. It's like, you'll see that they had understanding. The farmers whose soil health card said zinc is deficient in your soil did know that, most of them, a lot of them did. Those who did not, they know that, okay, the card does say that zinc deficiency is not an issue for them. But regardless, when we asked that, do you need zinc, from their own belief, both of them said, yes, we need. If we can get it, we would want to have it. So I think, and it's still like a conjecture, and one would need to test it more rigorously, but it seems that this communicating things through tables and numbers is probably not working out. It's not getting there. Maybe something else, some other strategy is needed to convince the farmers that the scientific tests have some truth to them. So just summing up, what did we learn? We did an experiment, and we found almost low or maybe perhaps no impact of the scientific information on actual fertilizer use that farmers were making. Or, I mean, the impact on actual users is even the next step. Our surmise is that it didn't even change their beliefs. They didn't even change the priors that they had about their soil sample, the soil properties or their land properties. They thought probably that they know better. And the lack of impact is not for the obvious reasons that, at least that was obvious to me or to us. It's not because these inputs that are being recommended. For many of the fertilizers, the recommendation was to reduce the use, and also. It's not because the high input cost of inputs. As I said, DAP is one of the three big fertilizers, is the most expensive. And even for DAP, they're over applying. So it's not, the credit constraint doesn't seem to be a problem. And incentives, bad incentives are certainly a problem, but they're not the only problem. It's that urea is over subsidized is certainly a problem, but that's not the only problem why you see imbalanced use. You see imbalanced use even of those fertilizer groups that are not subsidized. Or not understanding the information, at least at the basic level, the superficial level that we could test through this very simple quizzes that we designed. That doesn't seem to be a problem either. So then, where do we go from there? You know that I talked about this big program that Government of India has launched, which is called the Flagship Program for Soil Health, and it's very ambitious, 145 soil health tests over the next 3 years. So one thing is that the Government of India has been working on soil tests and expecting that to change, at least reduce fertilizer subsidy for a while now. You'll see this graph shows that for last 3-4 years, about 7 million soil samples are being tested and the reports are being given. There's a portal on soil tests, actually, that Agriculture Minister launched last year. And there's a joint secretary in Government of India dedicated to this program. Like, it's called Joint Secretary INM, Integrated Nutrient Management. So it has been a focus of even the last government that we have. What the new government has done is what I think, at least our tentative lessons from the experiment is that it's going to provide 145, like 50 million. The program has been expanded, at least the target has been expanded from 7 million cards to 50 million cards every year. And the budget went up only from $25 million to $30 million. So on average, the budget allocation is less than $1 per soil health card. And what it means is that every hour, if this target has to be achieved, 30,000 soil samples have to be collected, analyzed, test results and recommendations be developed and delivered to farmers. Just to give you a context, when we were doing this experiment, it took us 6 months, the lab, the best lab. We hired the best lab, the most equipped lab in Bihar, and it took them 6 months to test 500 soil samples and then they couldn't even print the cards. We printed it ourselves with their permission. So I just think that it's far too ambitious, and it could even become counterproductive. Because in the past too, governments have set such targets, and I think one of the reasons farmers don't trust soil health businesses, because in the past, with such targets, the test quality was compromised, the soil sample collection was compromised. Farmers would tell you stories of how the extension worker would come and collect 100 samples from just the same plot to just reach the numbers. And then the test quality, there's many farmers in India you would meet whose soil sample was collected, but they never got the test results. So I think over expediting this thing and doing like trying to cover all this plot would not just not lead to any results, it might even be counterproductive. And I think that's what so my tentative suggestions, if there would be, is that earlier, before this flagship program was launched and budget was allocated, different states were doing this program in different ways. And I think we should review them and try to understand what worked better. For example, Gujarat's model was what we are doing at the all India level now, every soil, every plot, while other states like Karnataka or Haryana followed a different model. Karnataka government hired ICRISAT, they did the sampling plan and took like 5% sample, and they did sampling differently in different kinds of soil. Irrigated areas, you need more samples. Unirrigated areas, you need fewer samples. They did simulation test of what sample size would be good. And based on that, they did the test and then developed recommendations on a taluka scale. And then government funded or subsidized field experiments at the farm level, where farmers were convinced to try this suggested dose and see if it works better for them. And another thing that government of Karnataka did is didn't add any subsidy on macronutrients, but also provided some subsidy on the 2 or 3 key micronutrients to encourage farmers to use them. My just superficial understanding is that it has worked better in Karnataka than it did in Gujarat. Even now, Andhra Pradesh is going the Gujarat way. A couple of other states are not going that way. And I think we should look at it as which one works better and go. For Bihar, I am pretty sure, given the kind of soil testing infrastructure and extension infrastructure we have, is that we should not go the Gujarat way. We should try sampling, and we shouldn't go for like extreme customization, very high levels of customization. In that process, we might end up losing more than gaining. Thank you.
It has been a very informative presentation. Now, I would request Sisir to throw some light in the course of his discussion.
Thank you, Avinash, for this engaging presentation. And the question is of first order. So, my fellow development economist or economist who work with data, India is one place where they would like to work, because almost every year there are so many yojanas and schemes that are announced by the government, and the variations in the eligibility for those programs create a lot of scopes to evaluate those programs. So you see a lot of evaluations of all these yojanas or projects that we see these days. But unfortunately, most of these evaluations happen after the end of the program, when the program has realized and we have seen whether it worked or not. So this study is different in a sense. You are trying to evaluate something even before they have rolled it out completely. So that is something which we needed very badly. And so these rigorous evaluations of the programs are important for another reason. So the government tries to do pilot studies before they go ahead with the full-fledged program. But often it's the same department which does the pilot, and the bureaucracy is under severe pressure to show results that these pilots actually work. And we ultimately see that the pilots work really well because the entire government machinery is put behind the pilot. So a third-party evaluation of a project which is going to such a large scheme of providing customized results for 145 million cards is very, very warranted. So I congratulate them for doing it. So the question is important, no doubt, and it fundamentally relates to production processes. So how do you combine your inputs to produce something? And here the intervention is that you need to change probably the combinations of inputs that are required to produce something, and which is defined as technology. in the literature. So almost it is very similar to a question of technology adoption, whether you are willing to change the combination of input to something that is recommended than what you have been using so far. And there's a very huge, substantial literature on technology adoption. What are the factors that lead to or that are responsible behind technologies getting adopted, getting discarded, and so on. And typically, the two broad factors behind technology adoption is one is information diffusion, another is budget constraints. So information diffusion again can be through social network, it could be through someone who is the political leader or hold controls over all these people, or it could be reliability of the information. And there is another factor which is equally important, is whether people have the budget to implement or to adopt these technologies. And so I think it's more important to look into the factors why some people do adopt technologies and some don't. And this particular project was not designed for that. It was just designed to see whether providing information helps or not. So the second question, the factors behind adoption, are a bit tricky to answer, and I have some rather concerns about the study that we see. So, so can I use some of your slides, or?
Do you want to put it?
Yeah.
Or if you want, I can.
Yeah. So.
Which one?
So the scatter plot between the recommended and the actual. Yeah. So all three. Yeah. So this graph is intriguing. If you really look at it, so if you look at the right side, maybe where the recommended urea was above 200 or maybe 300 or so, you can see that the farmers, they underutilized the input or urea in this context. So it seems like that the amount of money or resources required when you are recommending something which takes a lot of money gets underutilized versus when it takes very less money. So it may be that you cannot rule out budget constraint that easily. Just looking at this graph, and if you look at the other three graphs as well. So the second one, even if the recommended amount is really large, let's say it crosses the threshold of 150 kilograms, then you can see that they are underutilizing, not overutilizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if you look at the third graph, you see the same thing. So if the recommendations are really, really high, then farmers tends to underutilize. So that means that they are concerned about their budget probably. We don't know. Can you really slice it up by their several characteristics, like their potential income or something, to see why is it that underutilization is reported when the recommended amounts are really, really large, right? And even in this particular scatter plot, it tells you a lot about the data. So if you really look at the plots are really horizontal at levels which seems a little bit weird. So look at maybe 180 kilo. You see like a lot of the scatter plots are horizontal. Similarly, at 220 maybe there are a lot of plots that are horizontal. Similarly, at 300, you see a lot of these horizontal plots. So it seems like farmers are either reporting or rather prone to report one particular number when they are asked actually how much urea or how much potash or how much phosphate did you use. It seems to be, it could be due to bulk purchase. So maybe they are getting bags of urea or bags of potash and dumping the entire bag, maybe just because they don't have storage capacity. That could be one issue. Another issue could be misreporting. So I don't see why there should be, so and this is common for all the three graphs. So if you look at the other two, so this is urea.
Sorry.
That's again DAP, and you see that the scatter plots are horizontal at levels of 100, maybe 80, or even here. You see that they are horizontal. That means they are reporting, all of them are reporting the same number of fertilizer being used. So either there is some measurement error or there is problem with storage technology. So those are some of the issues that I had with the data. And so another problem or another potential problem that I think could be there, the way you try to elicit willingness to pay. So you are asking them what is the amount they are willing to pay, given that your information about whether you need it or not. So you have to make sure that resale is not possible in this setting, because even though I don't need urea or potash, I may buy it because the auction price is lower than the market price, just because I want to sell this bag of potash later in the open market. So if you don't rule out resale, then it doesn't really elicit the willingness to pay. So you cannot infer from that information that the willingness to pay are the same across your treatment and the control. And one minor comment that I have, so if you go back to the summary stat table that you presented.
Is it the balance?
No, the summary statistics where you show the mean for control and the treatment.
These?
So, no, this Excel table with
Okay, got it. Sorry.
where you highlighted the.
It's slow, sorry.
Yeah, this one. So, you highlighted this. I wanted to highlight this one as well. So if you look at this particular question, whether soil is tested before or not, so the difference seems to be rather large. So 63% of the...
It's 0.63%.
0.63%.
And 1.08%.
Oh, okay. So, then I misread so this is really low then. So I misunderstood this,
No,
so then
sorry,
I'm sorry
yeah,
about
yeah.
it. So the question is first order. There is no doubt about it, given the amount of money spent and given that given that the government is spending so much money and it really leads to future yields and the quality of the soil. This is one particular, or rather every government project should have built in such evaluation to begin with. I would like to comment on what could be other potential factors where why you may not see these. So since this is a production process, and when I used to teach my undergrad students, one thing that I would teach them is the diminishing returns to factor of production. It's not necessary that you keep increasing the factors that you employ and you get higher and higher inputs. The diminishing returns sets in at one point, and it's not true that people or everyone readily understands the concept. Generally, the idea is if I double the input, my yield will double automatically. So it could be that farmers intrinsically do not understand that there are negative returns to over-application of these inputs. And also, farmers are pressed with competing needs. So if you really want very high yield today, and if you understand that applying high amount of nutrients would give double returns, you would automatically go that because you don't care about future much because you are pressed with competing needs. So time preference could be an issue. I want a very quick result. I want it now. I don't care about what happens to the soil quality in future after 1 year or 2 years because they are just cash strapped. So that could be another reason. These are very difficult to answer or to figure out empirical evidences for these, but it's a good start. I'm guessing this is an ongoing project, so you might want to look at some of these questions as well. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer now? I could just answer some of those. I could respond later.
Please.
So thanks, Sisir, for very useful comments. I just respond to two things. The last point is like we have been engaging with these farmers for a while. So for another project that we're doing, we did measure their risk aversion parameters through some experimental methods. We haven't brought in here. In further analysis we'll do it. And also how do farmers learn and the time preference. Those we try to measure. So we'll use those. Thanks for that. The other one that you said is that the farmers are giving us thumb rules of how much fertilizers they apply. That is a serious problem. I admit it. It's very hard to get, unless you go and measure it yourself at the time of application. It's very hard we try to collect plot level data and repeatedly told them to tell us exactly how much did you use, but both issues that you raised are there. The fertilizer comes in bags, and once you open the bag, you have to apply it, so that issue is there too. But it's also a measurement issue, is like they tend to tell you a kilo a kattha or 1.5 kilo a kattha, so that bunching is a real problem. But I'm not that worried about it. It's like it may change, affect the variation, but it's still a fact that it's much above what is recommended. On the diminishing returns, it seems that I was surprised when I found that farmers in Bihar, I was thinking that farmers in Bihar would be under-applying, though we had checked secondary data in Bihar, and in the last 7-8 years, fertilizer use has increased very rapidly. So when I went around and asked experts, they said, no, that use is in Bangladesh and Nepal. Actual use in plots is still under-application in Bihar. So, but I was surprised, but it seems that they are way above, and it's true that maybe they are not processing it. what I found, and I presented it in Agriculture Science Congress where I pissed the agriculture scientist off, is like, there's absolutely no dialogue. For example, our recommendations suggested that you should be applying 1 kg potash per katta in your wheat. And our farmers outrightly rejected that idea. They're like, no, if you apply potash to wheat, it burns the crops. And I was like, no, but this is from the scientific expert. I think, but we couldn't push it too much because we were not covering their downside risk or anything. So it seems that farmers have some beliefs which are very set, and somehow the dialogue between the science and the farmers is not happening. So it's like one is not understanding the diminishing returns, but also, as I gave the Bangladeshi example, they're pretty sure that what they're doing is better, and what the farmers are saying that apply by teaspoons is not good. So it's a puzzle for me, is like why that is. I want to trust scientists, but it seems that farmers are more stubborn. A third thing, which is just a slight aside from the comments that you made, is like I also think that the recommendations, sometimes I suspect that we are selling cheap science to farmers. If you see the recommendation algorithm that is used, it seems too simple. I understand that maybe the simple could be better, but it's very simple. It's clear-cut linear equations on it's called soil test-based crop response, STCR, soil test and crop response. And the crop response functions that agriculture universities in India use is basically a linear function of yield. If you have 1 ton, you apply this much. 2 tons, you apply by, it keeps increasing by fixed quantity. And I cannot believe that anything out there in the nature is linear. So I sometimes do worry about it, but when you tell that to agriculture scientists, they know better than I do, they would not accept it. So thanks a lot for very useful comments. And yeah, it's kind of interesting why things are going the way they are going. Thank you. One more thing, sorry, I forgot. The resale problem, we checked it. We gave very small quantities of zinc, not the full dose that we sold, and we made sure that they are not reselling it. Also, the price at which they bought, the average price, there may be some lowers, it's lower than the MRP, of course, but they cannot sell it to at least the dealer, because the dealer's cost is less than what these farmers on average bought it. Plus, we are trying to monitor the resale. That's a very valid.
You want to make any further comment?
So the resale could be other farmers as well. So that could be one. Still, I don't want to nitpick on this, but
Before I throw the house for further questions, I have got a few comments to make. I think I am allowed to do so. So there is a clear evidence that most of the farmers overuse nitrogenous fertilizers. I think on my own level I have tried to look into it. There is a traditional belief among the farmers, at least in Bihar, and to some extent it is true also, that nitrogenous fertilizers, although the retention of nitrogenous fertilizers is 30 to 35%, rest of it is rejected, that immediately it gives green foliage. So there is a belief and there is a satisfaction that as soon as I put the fertilizer in the field, the foliage increases. It may not increase commensurate, it may not give commensurate yields, but the foliage increases. So the farmers think that because of the fertilizer, nitrogenous fertilizers, the soil health is improving and it gives better crops. And secondly, I think overuse is partly due to the heavy subsidy given on nitrogenous fertilizer. The subsidy regime as on today is in favor of nitrogen rather than potash or phosphates. So I think these two aspects, one has to look into it. If what Avinash said, that soil health card is not of very big use, so perhaps we can look into the subsidy regime and rework the subsidy regime so that instead of getting it skewed in favor of the nitrogenous fertilizer, good amount of attention is given to potash and phosphatic fertilizer also. Because the ideal dose of NPK is 4:2:1. Of course, it depends on crop to crop, but the ideal dose is 4:2:1. But what I see from Bihar use pattern, that sometimes it is 22:2:1, sometimes it is 22:1:0. We have got the figures. So it is heavily skewed in favor of the nitrogenous fertilizers. Thank you very much. Now I open the floor for questions. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
The whole thing was very nice, but one thing I want to add is the role of sellers who supply manure to the farmers. They play a very big part in advising the farmers, because if you go to buy fertilizers, they will say urea and DAP, and this I have seen myself, that these are only things that they are available at the shop and not zinc and potash. So if I go and want to buy them, it is not there, and they say you buy this. So my advice is that those people who are doing grassroots level work, they should also go to the sellers and then see that they give good advice, because the farmers, they trust the sellers more than the scientists, because they see that they are there always in the near about, and there they can go and say that what you gave us, it was rash, it was trash. So they believe the shopkeepers who are their friends and from whom they can interact. That's why I think this small advice will be something good for the whole of the research.
On what you said about what agricultural scientists suggest and the linear models they use, and the farmers' reluctance to follow some of the recommendations. So, leaving aside lots of issues were raised, I'll just focus on one narrow sort of line of thought. So, clearly, farmers, the stakes are high, it's their livelihood. If somebody comes and tells me how to write papers, clearly two things are to be considered. One is the credibility of the person who's giving me the advice, and second is what's my incentive to adopt it. So it just seems that use of economic incentives here might be just a much more credible way to go about it, because otherwise, if you yourself have doubts about whether these linear models are giving the right sort of, clearly a farmer who's sort of essentially household income depends on this, it's likely to be skeptical. And yet, if you somehow protect downside loss or sort of, actually offer some guaranteed money, this can be different sort of incentive schemes. That might be, take care of the problem.
It also requires much intensive presence on the ground to make sure that he or she is doing what you are incentivizing and monitoring. This experiment was kind of a lighter experiment, if I may say so. So yeah, it's totally taken.
Just a quick follow-up.
Sure,
I mean, for many other things, I mean, if you really look at a very different context of adoption of mobile phones, despite all the conservatism, all the reluctance and so on, very poor people have adopted it, they've seen it work, and so it's not like there's some intrinsic resistance to adoption.
Thank you for the discussion very much, and thank you also for the chairman and your remark. And I would like to add to another possibility, and I realize it is a very daring thing to say in this audience, but there's a kind of, this whole project is very much, it's not demand driven, The government project is not demand driven. They provide things, and it is not the farmers who say we need this, this, this. This is very much with many of the government programs. It's not the farmers who say we need this for the soil. This means you are actually giving preference to the scientist knowledge and not to the knowledge of the farmers. You have mentioned several times that the farmers have different ideas what particular chemicals do to their crops of what they need. And I do agree, there are other reasons also why they still buy, like selling it, or not using it, or no knowledge. I don't discount, but could it be also be that some of their knowledge might be more truth than the knowledge the scientists find, because they are there for centuries and they know maybe much better what they need, not only for the soil, but what crop they want to use and what this particular crop needs, or a combination of crops in the soil. So I think that should be taken into account and not discounted that they don't know what they need and what this does to their plants.
I agree. I mean, I am not in a position or not qualified to test if the scientific recommendation is true. It can be tested only on the ground. And it's possible that maybe some of the things that farmers say are true, but it's also a possibility sometimes the bad heuristics also come to stay, right? So I think I'm kind of agnostic on like who's true or who's not. It's possible that farmers have some wrong beliefs and they have come to take a life of their own. We see that in our thing. As per the scientific things, I went and talked to the lab people and made this point what I was making in this room and also in the Agriculture Science Congress in Karnal. But maybe I need to change my communication strategy. It was not taken well. It was not received well. So, yeah, your point totally taken, actually. Yeah, it's quite well.
Yes, from the behind. Yes.
So our land is getting saturated and the partial factor productivity is also decreasing. And I think the one option is the conservation agriculture, adoption of the conservation agriculture. Last 2 years ago, I went to Sikkim and I found that Sikkim is declared as a organic state. How can we implement the conservation agriculture strategy in Bihar so that means we can mitigate the effect of the high dose of the fertilizer and the climate change both with together in the respect of Bihar, because Bihar is present in the Indo-Gangetic plain and it is more vulnerable to climate change, and the fertilizer recommendation and high use of fertilizer is also a very critical point to our land, especially in Bihar. So how can you suggest that, how can you implement the conservation agriculture in respect of Bihar?
Responding. In fact, Bihar has got several agroclimatic zones, starting from Jammu side to northern Bihar. And the soil types are also very different. So basically, what the government is recommending is the integrated nutrient management. So it takes care of both chemical fertilizers, organic manures, and biofertilizers, along with certain green fertilizers like leguminous plants we can introduce. So basically, it is the integrated nutrient management. Now, in this nutrient management system, basically chemical fertilizers are followed by organic fertilizers, along with biofertilizers, which not only retains the soil health and improves the soil health, at the same time the productivity is also not affected. I think this is what we can look into it. And in my opinion, I think this is the only solution at present, rather than, because we don't have any drastic solution in mind, because farmers have got very specific beliefs. What Madam said, it's very true, because if a farmer goes to a shop selling fertilizers, the shop owner says ki urea laga do, abhi theek rahega, urea is the best now. He'll go and purchase urea. And of course that purchase is not always on cash basis, many times it purchases on loan basis also. So he is compelled to use urea, although the need may be more. So basically the organic manure has to be applied along with chemical fertilizers so that the overall soil health is maintained. Thank you very much.
No, I'm reminded of this study by Shivaraman on the initial Green Revolution days. You see, when these agronomists study these scientists, they often do it on very ideal farms in the agricultural universities and things like that. And the results you get from there are not sometimes the same as you get in the real fields. And the whole size neutrality debate and all that, the results are very different. So I just it's a hunch. because this is the point what Maitresh was making, that look, it's very unlikely that the farmers are simply resistant to what scientists are saying. Okay, I think those kind of notions were left in the 1950s or 60s. It's unlikely the scientists are simply saying something very simple. Okay, so is there a mismatch between the two in this actual circumstances where the farmers are applying it and in the context where scientists are saying that? I find this otherwise very difficult to believe that people will simply, without thinking of budget constraint or anything, keep on over-applying fertilizers, unless what Sisir was saying is there, that it could be that it can give you immediate results. And immediately a high yield is possible, even for a medium run, it's not a good thing. So, you know, these are the only two things I can think of.
No, I agree with your point that actually scientists, especially with the soil, the government of India has invested a lot, and agriculture universities have also invested a lot. So every agriculture university now has this STCR division, and they tell you that these parameters that they use in their algorithm on how much fertilizer to apply, it's all field tested, and not just field tested, it also keeps getting updated. For example, the soil test that we did, all of it was fed into a central database where this Institute of Soil Science in Bhopal uses it and analyzes the data to update what should be the recommended quantity or recommended dose. So as far as the science side is concerned, they are going to the farmers' field and doing some field testing too. And I also agree with you that it's not that farmers outrightly reject whatever comes from the science. At the same, while they are did not adopt these recommendations, you see farmers adopting all sorts of new technologies, new kinds of seeds and all. So I entirely agree with you that the problem is elsewhere, and as of now, I do not understand what is there, and we need to keep doing a series of experiments, and Matrish suggested there should be a next generation of experiments to see, if not this, what is it. So hopefully we'll do another round of experiment to try to understand it better. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Have you tried to run any non-econometric, non-linear econometric model on this, the fertilizer response vis-a-vis yield, so that we can get some, what is the marginal response on the control and non-control farmer?
No, we haven't run any models on it. I mean, what I presented was basically simple comparison of means. We have run some regressions on who does what and what not. But no, I don't have any, like I haven't estimated any production function to understand what their real marginal productivities are. I don't think we have the data to be able to do that. That would require a different kind of data set to really understand what the actual marginal productivities of different inputs are.
I think this brings us to the conclusion of this session. I thank both the speakers, and I thank you also, all of you, for a patient hearing. Thank you very much.